Hey everybody, here in this video we're going to look at breaking down the first two stimuli of the week. So we're going to review some of the breakdowns that we do when we see a stimulus like a map, a chart, or a graph. And then we're going to get into breaking down the two stimuli that we have in front of us so that I hope you guide you towards your next part, your next assignment for today. So we're looking here at the first stimulus, and as with any stimulus, when we have a question that has a stimulus, we want to look at the image, the map, the chart, the graph first, right? We want to get as much information as we can out of whatever they presented us before we actually get into the questions, because generally we're going to have an idea of what the questions are going to be asking us about, right? They're not going to provide us with an image or a map or a chart without referencing that in one of the questions. So breaking down the stimulus first, one gives us a preview of what we might see, but additionally, it gives us the right mindset for going into the question, right? What sorts of things we should be thinking about. Now here in this particular stimulus, we're looking at a map, and this particular section of the map would be East Asia, right? So we'd be looking at East Asia here, right? So we're looking at East Asia. And specifically what's highlighted here is China, right? So maybe we are going to be focused on China, maybe not, but we want to be clear about where in the world we are, right? Because that's also important, right? Geographically, in that geographic perspective, we want to know the space, the place, the location. That's all going to tie into these themes of geography, right? And the types of answers we want to provide. Now, aside from this, I want to look for my legend. I want to look for a key, for a title. It doesn't seem like I have a title anywhere here, but I do have a legend. And it says here 1 dot equals 1 million people. So I'm looking at population, right? The focus here is people on this map. Now, that being said, I have to look at the map in whole. And really, I'm just focused on China because that's what's highlighted. That's what's presented to me. And I have to look for what we might call patterns, right? Consistencies. I want to look for things that are unique or different within this space of China. So take a second and look through the map, right? We're going to talk through it in a sec. And I want you to think about the things that you see, right? And specifically, we're thinking about these million people, all these dots. And I want you to start thinking about where the dots are located, maybe where we have the most dots, where we have the least amount of dots. Are the dots clustered in any particular part of the space? I'm going to take a few seconds and think about those questions. All right, did you have some answers? Did you find some? So as you were thinking, I'm drawing here this compass for us. So we have a clear picture, right? And with any map, this is the easiest thing to do as a first step is to draw yourself a compass, especially once you get to thinking about space and pattern, because the location is going to start mattering at that point, and location being direction, right? Consistent direction, right? What we might call the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, and everywhere in between, right? So if we look at these dots, we can see divided into this grid, right, of a western space, an eastern space, a northern space, and a southern space. We can start figuring out where we see maybe the most or the least amount of dots, right? And usually when we see something like this, we're looking at populations, we want to focus on the most and the least, where the most people, where the fewest people, right? So if I look at this northwestern portion, right, I have a pretty, what we would call a dispersed pattern, right? A dispersed pattern of population. People are very spread out in this space. And in my southwestern space below it, I don't really have hardly any people at all, right? That's going to be important, right? I want to come back to this because there's going to be a reason for that, right? Every single phenomenon that we see in this map, there's going to be a reason for why it is the way it is. In this case, I'm going to hold off. I want to look at the other patterns first, and then we'll come back to this particular map and we'll figure out why maybe we don't have so many people in this area. Now, my northeastern portion, I have a pretty big cluster of people here, right, along this coast. I have more people than in the other spaces I've looked at, but it's not the most, right? The most amount of people I see, the largest clustering and agglomerations of dots are here in the southeastern portion, right? And we have this big coastline, this big clustering of people, lots and lots of people in this area of China. Now, in terms of looking at why I would have certain people in certain places, now this map itself is topographical, right? It's showing us physical features of the Earth. It doesn't give us much else. So it gives us the Pacific Ocean. That's important. We'll come back to that in a sec. It also gives us, right, the Gobi Desert here. This would be Mongolia, right, and then Russia above it. We have the Taklamakan Desert, the Tibetan Plateau, and the Himalayas, right? And the Himalayas, if you don't recall, are mountain ranges. So if we think about why we might not see so many people in this western side of China, we have some physical features that could explain that, right? If we look at this Taklamakan Desert, a desert area is not the best support for large populations, right? That carrying capacity is very low. If we think about the Tibetan Plateau, right, these raised areas and that lead into the Himalayas, these mountain ranges, those are very difficult to live on. Right? The Himalayas, as you get up into mountain ranges, becomes very cold, and it's hard for large groups of people to live in those spaces. So we think environmentally, right, our ESPN, right, what we want to be thinking about. We can think of these different economic, social, and political and environmental factors that could explain why we have large groups in one area and why we don't have large groups in others. Here we have environmental reasons, right? A desert and a mountain range aren't the easiest places to live, right? There's lack of resources, such as water, maybe access to food, lack of space to build, right? Where most people live in the world today, in cities, right? Lack of space to do that. And so we see lower population densities in these areas. Now, shuffling back to the other side of China, right? To our eastern side of China, why might what could environmentally explain the large distributions of people on this eastern side of China? Right, we mentioned a couple of them before, but again, I'm going to give you a few seconds before we move on to start thinking about that on your own, right? Thinking about why this area of China might be much more inclined to have large groups of people. So, did you figure it out? Did you think of it? Did you get it? It's okay if you didn't. So, this eastern side of China, if you recall, because we've been through this before, we looked at China a number of times throughout this year. The biggest environmental reason why we might have huge agglomerations, right, concentrations of people on this eastern side of China is because of this coastline, right, this access to the coast, right? That gives a lot of different factors, a lot of different rationale for why people move to the coast and to this particular area of China in specific, in this case, right? The coastline, access to the ocean, one, for trade, right? Access to other countries for economic output, access to resources like water, like fishing resources, food, right? And providing a plentiful amount of those things that can support huge populations, right? The carrying capacity on this eastern side of China likely is higher than the western side of China, right? There's just more resources that are available that can support bigger populations. Now, we also looked at in the economic unit before we left on our break at these other economic reasons why we would have huge agglomerations today in China, and that's going to have to do with, right, what we called SEZs, right, these special economic zones. So we have all these businesses that are in these areas that have a lot of access to free trade, right, or at least to more free trade than in other parts of the country, and that brings in the big bucks, right, that brings in a lot of money for the country, and to these areas in specific. So when people are looking for jobs, people are looking for the wealthy places to live that happens to be on China's coast, right, because of these SEZs that they've established. This is our first stimulus of the week. All right, I hope this helped you, helped as a guide to frame this question for you. Now, for this stimulus of the week, you're looking to do the same as with the other stimulus, which is the second video you'll be looking at, and looking at creating your own FRQ questions for these topics, right? Now, in thinking through the annotations, I know it may seem right big, like creating my own FRQ. What does that mean? It means the same as what you think it means. Right? You're going to be developing questions to develop your very own FRQs for this topic based on the stimulus itself, right, and the connections that we can make to it. All right, so you want to be thinking about the annotations that we made, right, the rationale, the reasoning, what information someone might be able to tell you about this map if they break it down as we did, right? Those are the types of questions you're looking to ask, right? If nothing else, you want to make big connections to the course, right? Maybe we didn't talk about urbanization or rural to urban migration, environmental effects, etc., of populations, right? But all of those things are relevant to this topic, right, of population, right? It has so many different connections that are there. What you're thinking of for this first assignment is the types of questions you can ask of people that are related to human geography, right? Maybe that's going to be about vocab, maybe that's going to be about connections. If anything else, right, if you get stuck, I'll be there for office hours, and you're free to contact me if you need the help outside of those office hours. I'm more than happy to walk through your questions. I'm more than happy to walk through your thought process to help you develop the best questions that you can, right? Hopefully this has been helpful and it's been a good foundation for you for this assignment. After you've done with this, or if you came here first, go ahead and head over to the other video so you can see the stimulus number 2 slide. Right?